So, so paradigms, the important point about paradigm is not the truth. You know, the truth is built in that paradigm, and that's the divine component. But then there's the human contribution. And of course, this is the religious paradigm. If you want to talk about scientific paradigm, you might call it something else. But it's about what's functional. For example, that particular paradigm that we live with right now, and we have inherited it from generations ago and centuries ago, and we have made very little update to it. That paradigm may have been very much functional 500 years ago, or 600 years ago, or 700 years ago, when Islam was triumphant, when the Muslim countries were in control, when we were not facing with challenges, where we were the source of the stress to another civilization, where other civilization would say, oh, look how these people, this is the way to do things. But that same paradigm that may have been functional centuries ago is certainly not functional right now, is now dysfunctional. So this is about the study of what's the human component and what's the divine component, and how you could analyze the human component and update it in a way that bring us back into function. I'll give you an example. So we
just the word update is not necessarily something that people will look at and will feel as if it's the right term. Like, you know, we need to be honest in how how we address, you know, these issues and these so-called contradictions, and we can't just be like, oh, we need to update so that we can, you know, work better in today's society. That can't be the goal, because what if you try and update it and then you know, in order to find a solution that works with today's society, but maybe that's not what the solution is meant to be. Maybe that is the wrong. Maybe it is wrong what you're doing, because like how are you careful not to just change something in order to appeal to who is on the helm, you know, right now, and in order to better, you know, I don't want to say assimilate, but integrate with Western society, when in reality we just have to be honest in finding out what is correct, right?
Excellent question. I will answer this after I give you a duality. I want to define a duality of conditions that we lived through, and then I'll give you the exact answer to that. That duality of conditions is, or maybe it's more of a continuum, but I'll give you the two extremes. On one end, people are intellectually productive. That's somewhat like Imam Malik, Imam Abi Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, and they're immediate students. They're intellectually productive. They're building schools. They're building fiqh paradigms. They're giving answers to true problems that are being faced by societies that the Quranic text, at least, doesn't necessarily address it in detail. So those are the innovators. Those are the people that are productive. And then slowly after that, you fall into taqlid. And taqlid is basically to follow exactly along the same path without much
it's copy.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That's the exact definition of
And
taqlid.
right now we got to a point where there is so much taqlid that people cannot, you know, when people are productive, what do? What does it mean to be innovative and to be creative and productive? It's to look at other people's answers, challenge them, give different answers, and build something new based on those different answers. Abu Hanifa, comparing it to Malik, he did updates. He has updates in his usul al-fiqh. And his students have some updates based on him, less. Shafi'i has some major updates compared to Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik and those two schools. Major updates. People came after him, for example, Imam Ahmad. He has some updates on Shafi'i. Minor, not extreme, but they do exist. And if you go all the way to the extreme, and we'll talk about all those updates and how those schools are built, and then the Zahiri have even more updates. Even
Who
to
are the
the
Zahiri?
Zahiri are people who say the text whether it's Quran or Hadith, has an answer to absolutely every single problem you could imagine. And one of those people is Ibn Hazm. He was in Andalus. He was a genius, but at least in my opinion, his paradigm was severely restrained. But he was literally a genius. And he was able, because he was genius, he was able to make it functional. As restricted as the Zahiriya paradigm is. I mean, it is restricted, just take my word for it. It is very restricted, but he was able to make it functional. Not right now, but at that time. So to answer your question, updates, everybody's making updates. Whether you realize it or not, and this is studying the chronology of the paradigm, you will see that very easily without, we, centuries later, we got a product. We were told that product is the final version, it's a seal of certification. It's not. Not as long as there are human elements in it. Not as long as there's different ways to answer. For example, I'll give you an example. I mean, in politics, something as simple as representation. The concept of representation in a political system. Quran talks about وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. Quran talks about وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُم. It's a very, very great principle. وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُم is their leadership style or their mechanism of making decisions about grandish, / i.e. political, is a communal act, is a teamwork. Basically, basically he's saying politics is teamwork. That's exactly what he's saying. So it goes to the heart of the matter of representation. This is what the Quran is saying. But it's an extremely general statement. To bring it into application, you're going to have to add and add and add a lot of human detail to that general statement. And that human detail, historically, created a particular political paradigm that ruled the Muslim world. That is not much different from the surrounding non-Muslim paradigm, which is the divine rights of kings. Instead, and you go to Russia or Europe, they call it divine right of kings. In Islam, we call it something else. We call it Qurashiyya. We call it if you belong to the tribe of the Prophet. So that's the human element of that political paradigm can easily be questioned. I mean, I'm giving you an example that is easily challenged. Not all human elements of paradigm are challenged. So the paradigm of Qurashiyya, meaning to rule, you have to belong to the...
And where do you get this paradigm from?
It's from Hadith.
What is the Hadith?
Hadith says, there's actually four Hadiths about this, and I do plan to talk about them as examples in later books, so I don't have the actual citation from, but basically one of the Hadith says, it goes something like, and this is not an ambiguous concept. I mean, it's all over the net if you want to research it. Right. But basically, it says no one should challenge people of Quraysh for the leadership, or at least that's the interpretation of the Hadith. Right. Of course, you get the Hadith, and then you get the interpretation of the Hadith, which is also another problem. Or one of Hadith says this thing, لا يزال هذا الأمر being understood, that word amr being understood as political leadership, although it's it's subject to interpretation. لا يزال هذا الأمر في قريش يعني إلى يوم القيامة. One of the hadith says إلى يوم القيامة. So
until the day of judgment.
Yeah.
Perhaps we should put all of the hadith into the description of the video.
Yes. Well, I'll bring, when we touch on this again, I'll bring the exact citation. But this is an example. You asked me about update. Update sounds like, from your perspective, sounds like it has a bad taste. Mm-hmm. It's like it's like the final product is it's delivered to us as with a gold seal of approval, so to speak. We think it's final. We think it's 100% divine, maybe, even though it's very easily to recognize that it's not. For example, the different opinions in fiqh. But when you get to the when you feel more comfortable with the idea that there is human contribution to that paradigm, then when you feel comfortable with that concept, you will be a little more easy talking about updates. Because you go back to, and how do you do those updates? Again, you go back to those choices that people made, and you analyze them. And it's not necessarily about just doing exactly the opposite of what other people did. I mean, your goal is not to contradict every single scholar that went before you. That's not the objective. The objective is at least reevaluate. You know, when you have a final product that is dysfunctional in certain entities, and I will go into detail where examples of that dysfunction. I know now we're talking general terms, but I will go in detail examples. And I just gave you an example of that dysfunction in politics, for example, in representation. When you have a final product that is dysfunctional, all I'm saying is understand that this final product is seen through a lens of a paradigm, and that paradigm has human component, divine component, and revisit the human component. Maybe you'll come up with something that is better, that is more functional. And in fact, what pains me is how the Quran is asking us all the time to stimulate our thoughts, stimulate our mind. What is the everlasting everlasting mu'jiza for the Prophet?
Mu'jiza as in miracle.
Miracle for the Prophet. It's the Quran. You know, one of the I heard this concept from one of the people that write in the Middle East, and I really liked it. Every single mu'jiza that happened before the Prophet, it was designed to astonish the mind, to subdue, to crush the mind. It's a mind-boggling, splitting the sea, making a stick into a snake, resurrecting the dead. I mean, those are things that the mind will do what? Say, oh my God, this is impossible, right? The Quran is exactly the opposite. The Quran, which is the mu'jiza of the Prophet, is there to stimulate the mind, to lift it. The other ones were there to crush it into belief.
Into submission.
Yeah, this is it, to lift it into belief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks in countless verses about stimulating the human mind. And then He gives us principles. But the problem is, when you see the principle in the Quran, for example, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُم, but then you see the paradigm, the final detailed manual, if you will.
What did you say?
When you see the principle in the Quran, for example, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُم, which means politics is teamwork.
Yes.
And then you see the final product of the paradigm, the detailed manual on how to actually live your life on a daily basis, severely disconnected from that principle. You have to question. I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing to have a paradigm that is dissociated from the principle, but functional for whatever reason. Not a lot of people are gonna stir up trouble because it's functional, it's working, even though it's dissociated from the principle. For example, the paradigm of slavery. It was functional for a while. Things were happening. Slaves were, I don't know if the word fine is right, but they were living.
No, slavery is a giant concept, and there's lots of misunderstandings.
But my idea is, it's what actually triggers re-evaluation is not how removed the paradigm is from the principle that is stated in the Quran, but actually how functional versus dysfunctional it is. What really affects people's lives, and that's why revolutions happen. Why? Because people are just it's not working. You could have sheikhs like the Azhar before the Egyptian revolution. They were saying, no, you can't demonstrate against the regime. That's what the official word of Azhar was. Because why? Because it's the religion.
And for those who don't know, the Azhar is?
The Azhar is the supposedly the beating Islamic heart of Egypt, or it should be.
Yeah. It's this one of the first schools that was established.
Yes. So the official opinion of the Azhar, the official Islamic opinion of the Azhar, that is Islamically not lawful for you to demonstrate against Hosni Mubarak.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that works for a while, but then boom, it breaks out. Dysfunction. That's exactly what I'm saying. At some point, it breaks down. You have to reevaluate. Of course, Islam doesn't really say that. No, but as the paradigm may justify it actually. Actually, you see, that statement pissed me off so much that I actually reviewed the whole thing. And sure enough, depending on what choices you choose as your operating system, you could reach a conclusion that says that.
How?
If you adopt this particular hadith and that particular understanding of this particular hadith and And then you could come up with an argument that actually says that you can't demonstrate. But you see, this is what they say in logic is the difference between soundness and validity. You could have a logically built argument on a false premise, but the final product is what?
Invalid.
Yeah. Or you could have a logically built, so they call that validity. It's a valid argument, but it's not sound.
Oh,
you know, it's like it's like 1 unicorn plus 2 unicorns equals what? 3 unicorns. But the whole thing is what?
Ridiculous.
Exactly. Or you could have a sound argument, which means a valid argument, which means it's logically built correctly on sound premises. And what I'm talking about is those premises, those choices starting points that they chose. You could have a completely different product. And that's exactly the paradigm. The paradigm starts with axioms. What are axioms? They are the most fundamental choices that you make. Those choices, that's the key point. You may come to those choices based on good judgment. And you may come to those choices just simply because you were told so.
Okay, so now, with everything that you said, and you kind of touched upon it a little bit, I think, but my next question has to be, what gives you the right to actually question some of this? Like,
Great.
The people who have come up with everything, the paradigm that we are. I mean, you talked about greatness. You talked about Bukhari, you talked about Muslim, you talked about Hanifa and Imam Malik, and all of these, and even geniuses as you mentioned. So, what gives someone like you the right to actually go in and question it? How can you possibly question what they bring forth?
First of all, I would say academic study and degrees that certify that academic study are a great system. Okay, I don't have anything against it. It's a great system, but it's a surrogate marker for knowledge. It's not exactly the same as knowledge. In fact, this system of academic study and degrees that certify that academic study is a relatively new. Back in the days, it was more of an apprentice relationship. I.e., I sit down, you are a scholar, I come down, I sit down, I spend with you 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I imbibe your knowledge, and maybe I'll go up to another scholar and do the same, and at some point I'll feel sort of comfortable to start on my own and become, scholar to others, and so forth. So that was apprentice type system, which was very common in the Muslim world for a long time. Now we live in an age where it's more institutionalized. Now, so institutions, they are good, but they have problems. They're good because they get stuff done. You study, you get a certificate, you go find a job, you find real solutions to real problems. The problem is, almost invariably, the human being that is a product of an institution is hostage to the paradigm of the institution. Questioning a paradigm is not about a quantitative approach to knowledge. It's a qualitative approach to knowledge. It doesn't, I don't need to read 500,000 pages of a particular paradigm to realize there's problems with it. I don't need to do that. I can read a lot less and I realize problem with it. I can go right after a while. Of course, you need to spend some time with the paradigm to get familiar with it, but after a while when you start recognizing contradictions, and more importantly, when you actually read the reaction or the answer to those contradictions by the people of that paradigm, and you realize that those answers are not satisfactory, those answers are not going to work for someone who is not deeply entrenched in that paradigm, you realize there's problems. So what I'm saying is you don't need degrees upon degrees upon degrees. I'm not saying that you should approach any issue superficially. You have to study it deeply, but it's not a quantitative issue. It's not something that you need to read thousands and thousands of pages or books to recognize. It's a qualitative a lot more than it's a quantitative. Of course, there's some quantitative. There's some quantity that you have to pass. but there's a significant portion that is qualitative. So from that perspective, if you're actually outside the paradigm, which means you're not, i.e., hostage to its premise, if you spend enough time and learn and study, which means you actually gain true knowledge, whether through the process of learning from scholars, or even going to a university, it doesn't matter. But the true objective at the end is not the surrogate marker for knowledge, which means a degree, but it's actual knowledge itself. And if you read and analyze in a critical way, critical thinking, to actually get to the heart of the matter, not in a quantitative sense, but in a qualitative sense, then you can. My answer is you can, and I can. You have to take steps to get to that point. Not, if you're sort of getting into this today, it's unlikely that you're going to have a sound understanding of this in a week or two. Probably going to have to spend years. But you don't necessarily have to go to a big university and get a big degree, or even though personally I am trying to get a degree. I've gone to a Sharia school university in Syria, but I was not able to finish it because I had to come here. But whether I get the degree at the end of the day or not, it's not going to impact this in any way, because this is, A, it's about knowledge, not the surrogate for knowledge, and B, it's about critical thinking, not just copying.
And it's what is commanded of us to do
Yes.
anyways, right?
Yes. Plus, again, come back to the same issue, it's about solving the dysfunction that we're living. Whether we, and this is, let's say theoretically you brush me off and say you're not qualified to deal with this. Well, the dysfunction is not going to go away. If I stop talking about this today, the dysfunction is still going to be there. So someone else is going to come and do it, whether I like it, you like it or not. So so with this, I think I covered most of the points. So what I'm saying is institutions can actually become sort of a hindrance to advancement in this, because their purpose is just to validate the existing paradigm. I mean, for example, when I was actually in the Sharia school that I told you about, they would ask us research questions to do research papers. But the question itself has no room for innovation whatsoever. Like, for example, and there's one example that come to mind, and I really hate to bring this example up because I don't like things that bother people. But one of the research questions was about the revolution that was against the third Khalifa, which is Osman ibn Affan, and the research question was not about what would you ask a research question about this issue? Like, maybe what are the reasons for this, or what are the predisposing factor? I mean, to me that seems like what is a reasonable research question. But the research question that I was asked to do about is state the explanation on how the people that revolt are damned or vicious or so on the wrong, 100% wrong. Basically, the research question about why are they 100% wrong, and the people of Medina 100% right. I mean, that by itself is, obviously. So this is what I mean by institutions sometimes can be hindrance to knowledge because they just validate the existing paradigm. And this is not just in religion or in Islam, for that matter. I'll give you another example in cosmology. If you are in an institution that describes or teaches cosmology according to the current religion of cosmology, which is the Big Bang theory, and your research question is going to be about this particular detail in the paradigm, or to add more information or that particular detail, they will never allow you a research question that questions the paradigm. For example, redshift. The whole thing is built on redshift, meaning redshift means things are running away. There's absolutely no question that will be. In fact, if you start researching questions that validate that do not validate the paradigm, or question the existing foundation of the paradigm, your funding will be cut. Pure and simple. Nobody's going to spend money on something that is going to flip things on its head. It's a human condition. Again, it's a human nature. So institutions can have their own problems in that regard. So being outside institution, or at least not at the mercy of institution. I'm not saying outside institution. I believe in systemic study and in universities and in going, you know, in exams and step after step and semester after. I believe 100% in all of that. But at least you have to be conscientious of the pros and cons of the institution. And one final comment about the taqlid. You know, talked about taqlid.
The copying.
Yeah, copying. There is a concept which is self-defeating that sort of propagate that, is that we don't know much and the people before us are like geniuses, you know. The reality of it is they are human beings like us. Yes, they have accomplished much and that is a lot to be praised, but they're not genetically different from us. We are in fact, we have far more exposure to information that they ever dreamed of. So this concept about, you know, sort of mystifying the scholars of the past and totally shooting ourselves in the foot today is a psychological problem, and it stems right from taqlid. So you can, if you study hard enough and long enough, you can reach a good amount of knowledge. I'm not going to go into saying better or worse, that's not what I'm here. Yeah. But what I mean, you have to break away from that psychological, which I call it abai. It's an Arabic word that is derived from ab, or father. It's a formal, it's a pathologic fatherhood, so to speak. In which case, you know, they are great. You know, like when they say in America, the great founding fathers of the country. While you go actually and read their biographies, they had issues, to say the least. You know, whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's a psychological problem that stems from taqlid.
And it's I mean, the whole thing stems from the fact that the Muslims were doing great in the past, and
exactly.
We're not doing so great
exactly.
now. And so they just have to kind of look back and be
exactly.
like, well, what were they doing? Oh, they had the greatest scholars, they had the greatest of this, and we should just do
exactly.
what they were doing, and then
exactly.
that's going to be the cure to what we're going through.
And to that point, that's why I mentioned the issue of it's the dysfunction, not the dissociation from the principle, that brings about the challenge. I mean, one other question that I might add, oh, you're talking about this. Well, when people were putting down the paradigm and building it generation after generation, well, why didn't others object? That's exactly why. It was working. It was fine. Things were fine. There was no problem or minimal problems. But so that's not going to trigger reevaluation. Dysfunction is going to trigger reevaluation.
Okay, let's pause it.
Okay.